Arizona Territory, 1883. The sun was already crawling high when the woman stepped off the stagecoach into the dust of Bisbee, her boots hitting the ground like she meant to stay. The cowboy leaned against the post outside the livery, a coil of rope in one hand, a half-chewed stem of grass in the other. He did not notice much most days, but he noticed her. She walked past with her head held even, her skirts lifting just enough to show worn riding boots. She had a rifle strapped to her saddle, a boy on her left hip, a girl holding her right hand. The children looked tired, but quiet in the way of kids who had learned not to ask too much. Dust clung to their clothes and hair. The little girl had a cut on her cheek, and the boy's arm was in a torn sling. The woman glanced at the cowboy once, her eyes sharp and steady. Then she kept walking. That was when the cowboy straightened, dropped the rope, and said, "You just changed my whole ride." She stopped, turned halfway. "Excuse me?" He nodded, stepping off the porch. Did not mean to say it out loud. "But I reckon I did." She looked him over the dust on his boots, the worn leather gloves hooked into his belt, the way his shirt did not quite hide the sunburn on his neck. His eyes were kind, though, and steady. "My name's Ramsey," she said after a breath. "Ramsey Trudeau's." He tipped his hat. "Tobias or Wren, you look like you got more weight on your shoulders than any trail horse could carry." Ramsey turned her face away. "We are not staying, just passing through. Looks to me like you got no escort, no wagon, and 2 kids who could use a real meal." Her jaw tightened. "Their father left us near Nogales. Took the last horse and the money. I got them this far." Tobias looked down at the boy, who was maybe 5, and the girl, who could not be more than 7. "What is his name?" he asked gently. "Jude," Ramsey said, holding the boy closer. "And hers is Josie." Tobias nodded once. "There is a boarding house just up the road. Miss Gwynn runs it. She will give you a room for the night if I put in a word." Ramsey hesitated, then said, "Why would you do that?" He shrugged. "Because I have sisters. Because I know what it looks like when someone is holding on too tight to fall apart." She stared at him for a long second. Then she nodded once. "Fine, just for the night." He led them toward the boarding house, the children dragging behind. Ramsey walked beside him without speaking, her hand never leaving the rifle sling. Miss Gwynn, a woman in her 60s who ran the place like a general, took one look at Ramsey and her children and said, "Room 2. Hot water's on the stove. You'll bathe first, then eat. No arguments." Ramsey nodded, murmuring a thank you. Tobias waited outside while they settled in. He was not sure why he had stayed. He had a job to get to cattle to move north before the week was out. But something about her had anchored him in place. When she came back out, her hair damp and pulled into a braid, the children freshly scrubbed and asleep inside, she looked at him from the porch steps. "I do not have money to pay for the room. I did not ask for any. I do not like owing people. Then call it even. For the look you gave me when you walked past." Ramsey let out a quiet breath. "You are strange." Tobias grinned. "Comes from too many days alone with cattle and sand." They stood in silence for a moment. Then she said, "He left us for a woman in Tucson. Said he wanted a new start. Took the mare, the coin, and my father's rifle." Tobias nodded. "That is a hard thing. I am not telling you for comfort. I just do not want you thinking I am weak. I never thought that." Ramsey looked down, then said, "We need work. I can clean, cook some. I know horses better than most men." He tilted his head. "You know your way around a ranch? My father ran one near Fort Bowie. Before he died." Tobias crossed his arms. "I have a spread a few miles north. It is not much, but there is room. I could use help with the herd, and the house could use hands." Ramsey raised an eyebrow. "You offering me work?" I am offering you a place, just for a while, until you figure your next step. She studied him again, the sharp part of her gaze softening just a little. You always talk this much? No, he said, just when I feel something worth saying. She looked away again, but this time it was not to hide. It was to think. You have horses? 5 on the land. 2 more I ride for cattle runs. I will come, but only if I work for it. Tobias grinned. Then it is settled. Ramsey exhaled, slow and tired. We will leave in the morning. As he turned to go, he paused and looked back. You really did change my whole ride, he said again, quieter this time. She did not answer, but her eyes followed him, and they were not as guarded as before. That night, Tobias lay under the stars beside his horse, his bedroll stretched on cracked earth. He could still see her face in his mind, the pride in it, the pain. And something else too, something he did not have a name for yet. He had no idea what tomorrow would bring. But for the first time in a long while, he wanted to find out. The wagon Tobias borrowed from the feed store creaked under the weight of the supplies he'd loaded before sunrise. He'd hitched his gelding and a borrowed mare to it, figuring it was better for the children to ride in the bed than try to keep up on foot. Ramsey sat up front beside him, quiet but alert, her rifle resting across her lap. Josie dozed against a sack of flour, and Jude sat beside her, eyes darting between the trees that edged the road north. They traveled in silence until the sun cleared the ridge. The road narrowed past the old copper diggings, winding between low hills and scrub pine. Tobias kept the reins loose in his hands, letting the horses set the pace. You always live alone? Ramsey asked, not looking at him. Since my brother passed last spring. He was the one for town talk and poker tables. I stuck to the land. She nodded once as if that lined up. You plan on staying out here for good? He asked. I don't know what for good means anymore, she said. But I'll stay long enough to teach Josie her letters again. And Jude needs time to rest his arm proper. Tobias glanced at the boy. He break it. Dislocated at the shoulder. I reset it with one hand while holding off a fox from our last hen with the other. He chuckled low. You're something. Ramsey didn't smile. Things had to get done. The trail forked at a dry creek. Tobias guided the team left, where the wagon wheels left ruts from months back. The land opened wider there, sun catching on the pale grasses. In the distance, the roof of his cabin caught the light just beneath a line of cottonwoods. Is that it? She asked. He nodded. Water runs behind it from a spring. Soil's decent. Got a few chickens, 2 milk goats. Barn's old but holds. Josie stirred as the wagon rolled to a stop beside the corral. Tobias hopped down and offered his hand to Ramsey. She hesitated, then used it to steady herself as she climbed down, then lifted both children out one by one. Jude clung to her skirt, and Josie blinked sleep from her eyes. Ramsey stepped back and looked around, taking in the single-room cabin with its stone chimney and the lean-to beside it. You built this. My brother and I did. Took 6 months before the roof held rain right. Ramsey walked to the porch, tested a step with her boot. It'll do. Tobias smiled. That's high praise. I didn't mean it as praise. He leaned against the wagon rail. I know. Inside, the air smelled of cedar and old tobacco. Ramsey moved slow, surveying the space. A wood stove sat in the corner, and a narrow cot was pushed against the far wall. There was a table with 2 chairs, a washtub, and a shelf with a Bible, a tobacco pouch, and a tin of matches. She turned to him. We'll sleep in the barn tonight. No need. I'll take the barn. You and the young ones stay here. Her brow lifted. I'm not putting you out of your own bed. You're not. I prefer sleeping outside come warm weather. The barn's got an old army cot and a better breeze than in here. She studied him, then nodded. Fine. The children wandered toward the hearth. Ramsey crouched to check the firebox and the hinges. Tobias watched her movements quick, assured, like someone who'd fixed things long past the time they should have broken. He stepped outside, gave the chickens some scratch, then filled a bucket at the spring. When he came back, Ramsey was peeling potatoes at the table, Josie shelling beans into a tin bowl, and Jude curled with a blanket in the corner. That boy always that quiet? Tobias asked, setting the water down. Only since the desert, she said. He saw more than he should have. He nodded. There's no rush on him talking. Land's quiet. He'll come back to himself. She looked up, something unreadable in her face. You sure about letting us stay? I don't say things I don't mean. They ate by lantern-light cornbread, potatoes boiled with salt, and beans Josie had shelled. Ramsey didn't speak much, but her gaze lingered on Tobias longer now. Not wary, not open either, just steady, like she was measuring the weight of his presence against the silence they'd come from. After the children were laid down, she came to the porch where Tobias leaned against a post, watching the dark roll across the hills. There's a man in Tucson might come asking, she said. He didn't turn to her. You owe him something? No. You afraid of him? No, he nodded. Then he can ask all he wants. Don't mean he'll get an answer. She crossed her arms. You always this calm? Only when I think it matters. Ramsey exhaled, then stepped down from the porch and walked toward the barn. She didn't say good night. He didn't expect her to. Still, he watched until her shape disappeared into the dark, and stood there a while longer, breathing in the stillness she'd left behind. The rooster crowed before first light. Ramsey rose without waking the children, tying her braid with a strip of cloth and pulling on her boots. She stepped outside into the chill, air damp with dew and the hush of early morning. Tobias was already near the barn, a pitchfork in hand, steam rising from the animal's breath as he tossed straw into the goat's pen. She walked over. You leave the door open like that, coyotes'll get bold. He kept working. I leave it open so I can hear if they try. You sleep all right? I did. Kids. They didn't stir. Tobias nodded once, then leaned the fork against the wall. You want to see the herd? She brushed straw from her sleeve. I do. They walked the ridge trail behind the cabin, the land sloping into a wide basin where cattle moved slow in the yellow grass. Ramsey counted them without being asked. You've got 31. 2 limping. 1 cow near calving. You see that from here? I learned to look hard when things depended on it. Tobias scratched his jaw. I've been meaning to mend the fence near the south point. You any good with wire? I'm better with split rail, but I can learn. Then we'll start there. They worked through the morning, side by side without much talk. Ramsey held the post steady while Tobias hammered, her arms sure and movements clean. She didn't ask for rest, and he didn't offer any. Around midday, Josie came down the path with a wrapped biscuit and a tin can of water. She handed them off without saying much, then stood watching the cattle like she belonged to the land already. Ramsey looked toward her. You help your brother feed the goats? Josie nodded. He brushed one. That's good, Ramsey said, and the girl's shoulders lifted just slightly before she turned and walked back. Tobias watched her go. She carries herself older than she is. She had to, Ramsey said, wiping dust from her hands. She kept Jude calm when I couldn't. Tobias crouched to test the wire tension. You ever think on what you want now that you're not running? Ramsey squatted beside him. It's too early to want anything but steadiness. What did you used to want? She didn't answer right away. Then, a stretch of land with my own mark on it. A place where winter didn't mean hunger. He nodded. That's a want worth keeping. By late afternoon, the fence line was whole again. They walked back slow, Tobias carrying the tools, Ramsey pausing once to press her palm against a tree trunk as if reading something in the bark. She didn't speak of it, and he didn't ask. The cabin smelled of beans and onions when they stepped inside. Jude sat beside the stove, a wooden duck carved from scrap resting in his lap. Josie looked up from the table, eyes alert. Ramsey took the spoon from the pot, stirred. "You carved that, Jude?" The boy nodded without lifting his gaze. Tobias stepped closer. "That's good work. You ever try a horse?" Jude looked at him for a breath longer than usual, then gave a small shrug. Tobias crouched beside him. "I got cedar scraps in the barn. You want? I'll show you how to shape the legs so they don't crack." Ramsey glanced at Tobias, then at her son. "He's not ready for too many words. I ain't in a rush." That night, Tobias stayed near the barn again, but this time he rolled his bed out where he could see the porch. The light from inside flickered against the window, and for a long time there was the soft clink of dishes and the low hush of Ramsey's voice guiding the children to sleep. In the quiet that followed, he leaned back on one elbow, looking at the stars. He didn't think on her husband, or what roads she'd walk to get here. He thought about the way she moved when she worked efficient, focused like each task steadied her. And he thought about how she hadn't looked away when he offered to teach Jude. She hadn't needed an answer then, just someone to make space. He didn't know what she'd want when the air turned cold again, but he knew he wanted her to want something here, something rooted. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of mesquite and wood smoke. Tobias closed his eyes and let the weight of the day settle into his bones. The woman had walked past him once and changed the direction of his life without meaning to. Now he was ready to walk beside her if she let him. Rain came in the early dark, soft at first, then steady, tapping against the roof like fingers drumming a lullaby. Inside the cabin, Ramsey sat by the lantern, needle in hand, mending the hem of Josie's dress. Tobias leaned near the stove, turning a strip of hide over a tin cup, shaping it into a loop for the barn gate. Josie and Jude had long since gone to sleep. The boy curled beside the hearth with the wooden horse Tobias had helped him shape that morning, the girl on the cot with her hand tucked beneath her cheek. "You always work this late?" Ramsey asked, tying off the stitch. "Only when my mind's restless," Tobias said without looking up. "And when the rain's falling like it wants to wash the whole place clean." Ramsey folded the dress and set it aside. "You ever think of leaving this land? Trying somewhere new?" "I did once," he said. "Went as far as Kansas City. Didn't take to the noise. Felt like the buildings were all leaning in too close." She leaned back in the chair, arms crossed. "I used to think I'd end up near Colorado, somewhere with pines and fewer men looking to take what wasn't theirs." "What changed?" She looked toward the window. "The weight of things. Sometimes you carry something so long, it starts to carry you." Tobias nodded slow. "You still think on that man?" "No," she said. "Not him. Just the way I stopped trusting myself after. That part's harder to shake." He set the leather down. "You don't seem like someone who lost her own compass." "I didn't lose it," she said. "I buried it. Thought it'd be safer in the ground." Rain struck harder against the panes, wind pushing through the cracks in the doorframe. Tobias stood and added a log to the stove, the flames flaring up with a soft roar. "I was married once," he said, voice low. "Didn't last 2 winters. She didn't take to the quiet. Said the way I lived made her feel like she was disappearing." Ramsey didn't speak, only watched him. "She left while I was out on a cattle run. Took her things and the good quilt. I found a note tucked in the grain bin." Ramsey's voice was quiet. "You angry about it?" "For a while. Then I figured we'd both done wrong." I gave her a life she never asked for. She stood and moved to the stove, holding her hands near the warmth. I don't think you're the type to disappear someone. Tobias turned to her, his face unreadable in the flickering light. I don't hold tight to what wants to leave, but I'll stand still for what wants to stay. Ramsey looked up at him. I'm not ready for promises. I didn't offer one. The silence between them was different now. Not heavy, not strained, just full. Like something was being built, slow and careful, with no need to name it yet. She glanced toward the children, then back at him. They'll need their own space soon. Josie's starting to ask questions I'm not always ready for. I can clear the loft, make it livable before the cold sets in. That's a kind offer. It's not an offer, he said. It's just what's next. She didn't answer, but her hand brushed his sleeve as she passed him on the way back to the chair. Small, unhurried, intentional. Later, when she rose to head to the barn, Tobias stepped aside without speaking. She paused at the threshold. You still think I changed your ride? She asked. He looked at her, eyes steady. I think you gave it a direction. She held his gaze, then nodded once and stepped into the rain. He stayed there a while longer, watching the dark beyond the porch, the sound of her boots fading into the night. The land no longer felt like it was waiting for something. It felt like something had already begun. The heat broke in early September, and the days turned gold. Ramsey noticed it first in the way the goats grew restless in the morning, noses lifted, scenting the shift. Tobias noticed it in her. She no longer scanned the horizon like someone expecting to be chased. The loft had been cleared before the week was out. Tobias built the ladder himself, sanded each rung until it wouldn't splinter bare feet. Josie took to the space fast, laying out her folded dresses with care. Jude kept his wooden horse tucked into a corner and lined up 3 small rocks beside it, silent but watching. Ramsey stood in the doorway that first evening and took in the sky, her arms folded, her eyes steady on nothing in particular. You're thinking something, Tobias said from the porch. I'm thinking it's strange to feel safe and not know what to do with it. He nodded and didn't reply. Instead, he handed her a mug of warm chicory and sat beside her, letting the silence stretch. I taught my daughter to draw maps, she said after a while. Back when we were alone most days. I told her if she could draw where she'd been, she wouldn't feel lost. Tobias glanced toward the window, where Josie's head was barely visible as she leaned over a scrap of paper. She's still drawing them? She started one of this place. Labeled the chicken coop this morning in crooked letters. He smiled. That's a kind of claim. Ramsey's gaze slid over him. You ever thought of having your own family? I thought about what kind of man I'd need to be first. And, he looked at her then, full and sure. I think I'm closer to him now. She didn't look away. I've spent so long waiting for the other shoe to drop. I forgot what it means to trust what's in front of me. You don't owe me anything. That's the only reason I can stand here and say I might want to stay. He set his mug down. Then let's build something you don't have to run from. That night she didn't go to the barn. She stayed inside after the children were asleep, her boots by the door, her braid loosened. Tobias made her tea with honey, and they sat at the table while the fire burned low. She told him about her father's final season, how the frost came early and the cattle died too fast. He told her about the year the well dried up and he prayed over an empty bucket just to feel like he was doing something. By the time the lantern burned out, she was leaning back in her chair, eyes half-lidded. Her voice relaxed in a way it had never been. I don't know what to call this, she whispered. You don't have to call it anything, Tobias said. You just have to live it. She stood, stepped close enough for her fingers to touch the edge of his collar. I want to live it with you. He didn't speak. He just raised his hand to her cheek and let it rest there, warm and steady, while the air between them changed into something whole. They married beneath the cottonwoods 3 weeks later. Miss Gwynn came out from town with a pie and a bundle of wildflowers. Josie wore a dress with blue trim sewn by hand, and Jude carried the rings in his carved wooden horse. The preacher spoke plain, and Tobias held Ramsey's hands like they were something sacred. The cabin changed after that. Tobias built a lean-to off the side, and Ramsey filled it with shelves for drying herbs and curing meat. Josie's letters grew neater, her maps bigger. Jude talked more, mostly to his sister, but sometimes to Tobias, especially when they carved together out on the porch. Ramsey slept with her back to the wall and her hand in Tobias's. She didn't reach for the rifle at night anymore. One morning, she woke before him and stepped outside to the soft hush of dawn. The land stretched out quiet and full, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was borrowing time. When Tobias joined her, he wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and kissed the top of her head. "This is ours," she said. "It always was," he replied. They stayed like that until the sun cleared the ridge, the light spilling down over the roof, the corral, the fields they'd plant in spring. Behind them, the sounds of children waking rose soft and familiar. The land no longer held echoes of what she'd escaped. It held roots and warmth, and the man beside her whose quiet strength had made room for her to become herself again. They lived that way, full, simple, and steady, and they belonged to each other wholly and without question for the rest of their days.